Well, good afternoon, everyone. I am Phil Carvil, Head of Clusters of the Science Technology Studies Council, but more importantly, the joy and honour to be the Chair of the Advisory Board for IBIC. And just speaking about IBIC for a moment, firstly, can I say a huge congratulations to the team and all the presenters on the conference so far. From hops to fashion, agri-tech to home care, I hope you agree. It's been a fascinating conversation and we haven't even stopped yet. It's also testament to the breadth and the opportunity for industrial biotech, as really exemplified in some of the amazing statistics the IBIC team showed earlier, with over 175 early career researchers trained through the program, 22 R&D projects supported, and 3 companies incorporated. Can we just get a round of applause for those statistics, please? From the UK side, the UK has founded more biotech companies than any other nation in Europe, and this has continued to be of strategic importance for the UK government, with engineering biology being one of the key strategic challenge technologies, critical technologies for the UK. In fact, I know it's been a week of announcements already, but if you do check the government website, a new foresight report on engineering biology aspirations has just been published by the government chief scientific advisor. So do check out the announcement on that, and it will delve into 5 of those opportunities, a number of which it's very clear the expertise is here in the room today to really champion that. And talking about reports, I was really touched by a report statistic I read recently in one from McKinsey, which talked about how 60% of the world's physical items by 2030 to 2040 could be manufactured through biological means. So that opportunity is massive. And I think to bring it back down to here in the Northwest and in regions, I'm delighted to be joined by a fantastic panel to discuss more about how we can grow both the opportunity for the UK, but also ensure that's connected to our regional innovation systems, particularly our academic and industry excellence. So I'd love to invite my panel to the stage, please, for this conversation. Hopefully in another room, yes. Now, I do like to be quite interactive with my panel, so I'm going to start by asking them to introduce themselves one by one. And one of our first questions was to ask about what they saw were some of the bottlenecks or challenges to really integrating industrial biotechnology into the manufacturing process. But I'm going to ask the room that question first. So firstly, can you introduce yourselves to the room? And then I'm going to ask us any initial reflections from the audience on that question. Matthew.
Matthew Kershaw, Principal Policy Officer for Innovation for the Greater Manchester Combined Authority.
Hi, I'm Jude Huggan from CPI. CPI are part of the High Value Manufacturing Catapult, and our job really is to support the translation of those innovations, be it chemical, biological or biotech based, into commercial reality.
Hi, I'm Mark Bustard. I'm the Chief Exec of IBioIC, something similar in acronym. We're based in Scotland and have been growing the Scottish cluster in industrial biotechnology. We were formed in 2014, so we've got a bit of skin in the game, and I look forward to having the conversation today.
So on that question on any particular perceived bottlenecks or challenges to integrating more innovation into manufacturing processes, do we have any thoughts in the room before I turn to my panel? Well, in which case we go, oh, we do have one.
Yeah.
Or 2.
My question is in terms of facilities that you can rent to do R&D in the region. So a lot of the facilities close to the university on the South campus of Manchester University requires some association with the National Health Service or an association with health. So is there a scheme to provide more space? For example, we're renting from a local firm, but we have to refurbish the rooms to make them suitable for lab work. And I believe Bruntwood have recently asked the council for their approval to do this. So I don't, is there any scope that the infrastructure would be there to make it a bit easier?
Okay, so we have an initial question from the audience reflecting on that, around the challenges around infrastructure access and support. So I'm going to let my panel digest that question, see if they want to respond to it. And I'll take the other hand, which went up as well.
Quickly and very related to that is the skills gap. Do we have enough people sufficiently trained at the different levels in order to service that demand?
Brilliant. So we have the skills as well. So we're going to take those two opening points. And panel, do you have any comments on what's been said so far, or anything you'd like to add around challenges and bottlenecks?
Pick that kind of first one up. I think working in the job I do, I think if you'd asked me to come up here with a piece of paper written down what the challenges that would be raised would be, there'd be capital, facilities, specifically lab space and the availability of lab space, skills, and then the patience of funding being in there as well. And that kind of very nicely linked them all into one in terms of being able to find the space, afford the space, have the space be the right thing for you. So yeah, I think we know those are the bottlenecks. I think it all comes down to that, the catalyst of cash. I think as we see more devolution, we'll hopefully have more control of being able to address some of those issues. I think interestingly, we look at companies like Alderley Life Sciences who've set up in Stockport, and they've been able to convert some office space into lab. And now we're supported by their landlord with that, and the council gave them some business rates relief as well. So we're looking at how we do that better, because it's expensive to build a lab from scratch and it's a dicey thing to build and have stand empty. So the ability to convert unused office is an interesting piece there we can do.
Okay, so from a combined authority perspective, it's always something you're thinking about, how you can de-risk those capital investments. Yeah. Jude?
On Teesside, there's been a recent announcement. There's going to be an expansion of the Wilton Centre. There obviously is some space within the Wilton Centre that exists already, but there's an announcement that there's going to be a new build of lab space, office space, as part of the Freeport initiative. So hopefully that will address some of that gap, certainly on Teesside.
Yeah, I can reflect as well. I mean, we've just finished a piece of work where we found nearly 30 of our companies are stuck in the space that they're in across Scotland and the Central Belt. The challenge we have with the geography of Scotland, as you're probably aware, is most of the activity happens across the Central Belt between Glasgow and Edinburgh. And in fact, that's where a lot of the heavy industry is as well, excluding oil and gas and offshore, obviously. The challenge that we see is that our local economic development agency, Scottish Enterprise, are very keen to help de-risk that, but they're not going to take all the risks, so it takes the private infrastructure companies and the science park companies to come in. The market is there. I think the challenge is that the companies get to a handful of employees and they're stuck within universities. And it's a bit of a difficult situation if they're not securing private investment because they can't afford to go out. And the reality of it is at the moment across the whole of central Scotland, there are no facilities available for wet labs for scale-up companies to move into.
Okay, so we've had a few reflections on comments in there. A, about the importance of engaging with region, how this is happening across the UK, but also how it's important to engage with the industry as well and find mechanisms to de-risk this linked into the academic expertise. Not quite there yet, but I will be coming back to hear about some of these learnings from the IBioIC program as well. But before I get to that, Matthew, region's been very prominent today, so why is innovation so important to regions from your perspective as Greater Manchester Combined Authority? And if I dare, Liverpool City region as well.
Well, normally when you do these sorts of things and you see that you're following a mayor and then Richard Jones, it's a real pain because you know the really good stuff's going to be gone. But they essentially answered this question for me earlier this morning when Mayor Rotherham touched upon the fact that if you look at the Liverpool City region, this is the same for GMCA as well, the key missions around decarbonisation, better health, the move towards prevention rather than intervention, the aim to have better, higher paying jobs that are more secure, that give a better quality of life, the need for innovation to move us away from business as usual and our current economic setup in the city regions is key to that. It's not going to happen without innovation. And so for us to achieve our aims, we need to kind of look at how we tackle some of these issues around being able to get the stuff that's really good stuff from our research excellence in our labs and in our universities into businesses that can then translate that into a commercial product or service, because we're not going to achieve what we need to achieve otherwise.
And just for those which might be new to working with combined authorities, how do you go about actually deciding what are those key sectors or areas you're going to focus on? You can't focus on everything, or can you?
We have an interesting discussion around this every time we're in the office when we ask this question, because we could go back to 2010 and the Manchester Independent Economic Review, but that's kind of a little bit ancient history. One of the things GMCA always prides itself on and claims that it does is all our policy is based on an evidence base. And we've got various bits of research that we've done over the past 15, 20 years, including the Independent Prosperity Review, where we had economics like Maria Mazzucato come and look at our economy and our setup, but also looking at where our ref is, and a government that for 15 years, for better or worse, was very much focused on clusters. And we see the importance in clusters, but that push for you to pick a cluster, and Greater Manchester's pushed back that that's not how modern economies work, and having to make that argument and show that evidence base that actually no, we have multiple sectors that we have strength in, and we have multiple areas of excellence within our research base. And in fact, also then making the argument that I think was made a little bit in the Nurse Review, that actually the really interesting stuff, the really high economic value opportunities arise in the crossovers between disciplines and sectors. And that's where place becomes really important, because where the place is where those crossovers happen, and we're really good at kind of finding those opportunities and bringing them together, because the outcome for us is jobs and value, and it falls through the gaps in the research councils because it isn't what they're set up to do.
No, absolutely. And last point on this side. So we have a lot of people here from not just, actually first, hands up if you're from the northwest of England or work in the northwest. So I would say a large percentage, but not everyone. So if people want to get more involved in driving the bioeconomy, either in this region or in their region, how can they do that to really take things forward? In a few top tips from your side.
Okay, I think it kind of comes back to a question that was asked around how do we find the businesses who need the academic intervention. I think it's just come and speak to us. Be open, have conversations. The interesting point earlier around the academics who were making a product that actually was a useful thing for one of their colleague departments in one of the applications. Was that fluke that they found each other, or was it systematic? Whilst we're trying to systematise that, the only way we can do this is through conversations. So, I mean, the best bet this time is find out who your equivalent of me or somebody like me is in your local authority or your combined authority, and just see if you can get to speak to them.
And Matthew, will you be staying for the networking drinks?
No, I have to go home.
Okay, so as he rushes down the corridor, do ask him his questions. But no, do engage with your local regions, find your innovation champions, and if you don't know who they are, then either from the northwest side, I'm sure we can support you in wider field, then we can also look to do where there are introductions. And to a point that Andrew Bourne made earlier, that in councils, not just as SGSC, but also EPSC, they do have regional leads, which know their territory inside and out, both in England and all devolved nations. Shifting to devolved nations. So your programme has been going a lot longer than IBIC, and we would love to hear what are some of your early learnings for how to drive a connected regional innovation system around bioeconomy.
I have to think very deeply about this and say money. The reality of it is what you've created now with IBIC in the northwest is an opportunity to be a front door to drive all those connections. And that's what IBioIC did in the early days, which was it became a go-to, and it was seen as a champion for all these disparate companies and academics working in relevant and wider areas. I think also we need to appreciate things are moving. I mean, there's not much that we talk about with DCIT or more widely that doesn't involve engineering, biology and these sorts of terms. And some of the clusters where IB is very prominent have grown particularly strong in those areas as well. You know, so the northwest, northeast, Scotland, very strong in that. But I think critically for us was you are seen as impartial and being the champion for the cluster growth. So whilst it was fragmented small bits of cluster around in various regions, what we did was sort of pull all that together so you become a Scotland cluster. The one thing we should also identify is that money flows through UK sources as well, and so therefore a lot of our metrics that we have to deliver are very Scotland focused. But any company from anywhere in the UK can come and we can help establish a project with the Scottish academic. I know you won't want to hear that, but that's how we fund things, and we fund the academic. We're not able to fund the companies directly for obvious reasons. And so that's been a really positive thing, is joining up the fragments to become a very strong cluster. And recently we secured launchpad funding for bio-based manufacturing across central Scotland, which was the only launchpad that Scotland managed to secure on any topic. So we're very pleased about that, and that of course drives continued, collaborative research and development. I mean, on that piece, geography, you've got a very strong set of clusters in the room, and it's about how you play to that. I think the front door piece is important, being impartial in many ways and finding the best fit for what the challenge might be. And it's very important, I think we would term ourselves business-led, but deeply engaged with the academic community. And that's important, to be seen equally to service both needs. So we're not just about delivering what business wants. We need to understand the challenges that they've got, help them communicate that to academia, as you've heard. But I think there's a level of trust now where people come and they're willing to give. And I think the academic base, where it may have originally seen us as a competitor to things like business support functions in universities that already existed, technology transfer, commercialization arms. We're not there to do any of that. We're there to support that interaction with business and to bring the biotech specialism to that perhaps they don't have. So that all drove a really strong wave of opportunities. And I said money at the start, I maintain that. A lot of the leverage that we've had is by supporting co-funding of projects, and I know you're looking at doing that ourselves. If you come to the drinks reception, I've got a few words just to talk about some of the impact of what we've delivered, but we've done approaching 300 collaborative projects between business and academia.
And how long have you been going now?
11 years.
Fantastic. So averaging about 30 a year, fantastic. So we're doing on track there. We're 22 so far in the first year, so the things can only grow. But those key things about making sure you're impartial front door to businesses, but also in maintaining that glue between the academic and industry base while talking to Scottish Government. I did have a follow-up question around the mechanisms and initiatives you've deployed over the years, but specifically around public perception of industrial biotechnology and uptake. Have you done anything in this area to really make sure that the public or those not involved in the day-to-day technical side understand the opportunity and not pushing against you, as it were?
Yeah, we have quite a strong media presence, so we're very conscious about getting stories out there, being in the press, being in the journals and trade mags and things like that. We do outreach. We've got STEM programs the same way a lot of people in the room will be involved in. We go out to schools. We work across colleges as well, not just universities, so it's across the wider workforce. But we've really ramped up our public affairs activity, so getting really close into Scottish Government, but also UK Government, because ultimately that's the way. You talked about devolved areas and clusters. I think it seems like it should work better. It may not in practical terms, and still we need to influence at a UK level to make sure that it does flow into the regions as well. So I would say that. But I mean, we've had things in the Times and New Statesman. We go out taking showcases of companies and technologies to conferences around the world and things like that. So we're very conscious of trying to educate what we think in our terms we're very comfortable with. But of course, the wider public have always got some concerns, and so it's down to us to make sure that we communicate that effectively and positively.
Fantastic. So plenty to learn from you, but as we've seen with recent announcements, I think on Sunday, also where different clusters are now being incentivized to collaborate further. Had the announcement about Cambridge and Manchester being put together to work in particular areas in the government's announcements on Sunday, so let's hope to see more funding potentially to partner between IBIC and IBioIC as well in Scotland to really grow the connections here, but also, as you said, even to the northeast as well, with the key capabilities there. And Jude, coming straight to you now with the CPI's large and very strong heritage in industrial biotechnology and scale up, what are you currently working on to address or even develop the opportunities in this area around scale up?
I think the cluster projects are really great. What we're seeing at the moment, I think, is a real underappreciation of the size of the gap between those early TRL levels to commercial production, if you like. A lot of companies, investors, organisations, innovators come to us with an idea of what scale-up is, and actually having never been through the journey before, really get sort of stuck in that sort of idea of what it is to scale up. And so we really exist to try and help them to de-risk that process. I think the whole ecosystem, it needs a bit of a shift change. I think there needs to be more of a sort of feedback and an understanding from us as scale-up innovators to the innovators to say this is what it takes to develop a process or a product, this is how long it's going to take, to the investment community, this is how much it's going to cost in reality. And again, through to the public funding, Innovate UK, really to shift the focus a little bit around funding towards that translation piece, because I think that's where the innovations are falling down. It's not that there's the lack of infrastructure or money. It's specifically to look at scale up. I think that's a real issue.
And do you think there's anything specific in UK capabilities which needs addressing? So, spending reviews coming out tomorrow. So, but is there anything you would love to see in that's currently missing?
Yeah, I think a lot of what we fed back to the House of Lords and review around engineering biology is the access to the scale-up facilities. Scale-up is expensive. Large fermenters on the ground take a lot of energy. They're process heavy. They take a lot of money and for skilled people to use those facilities. And so, trying to sweeten that a little bit with some investment or public funding, I think would be really helpful. A lot of that would be matched by private investment, but again, I think just switching the focus a little bit from early stage interventions towards that translation piece is going to be the shift change that we need to see that productivity rise that was mentioned this morning and really enable that growth. It's one of the many mechanisms by which you can do that, but I think that's certainly a good starting point.
Okay, excellent. I'm going to shift to the audience in a moment, so do have your questions or comments ready. Before I do that, I just want to put my panel on notice for the question that I have for you in a moment after the audience, which will be, what are your top pieces of advice or tips to the IBIC team during year one to really accelerate and take what they're doing even further to drive a connected and thriving bioinnovation economy? So have that in your mind, get your top tips ready. No prizes for duplication, by the way. Do I have any questions or comments from the audience? I'm going to stand up because I can't actually see that side of the room. Any questions or comments? Everyone's really eager for that drink in a moment, aren't they? In which case, we have an opportunity to come back. But firstly, top tips to the IBIC team. Jude, take us away.
Yeah, I'm going to start. I think for me, any discussion I have with innovators and early stage funders, and that includes IBioIC and IBIC, make sure your company understands what the end goal is, and you almost reverse engineer, start with the end goal in mind and work your way back. Too often we see people coming to us for scale up, and they've beavered away, they've ploughed in a lot of money, spent a lot of time developing the best lab scale process they can, but ultimately it's not scalable. So the earlier you can have the conversation around how your process can be scaled, even if it's an idea on a bit of paper, the better. So I would try and include that or incorporate that into your programs. Always have the end goal in mind.
End goal in mind, perfect. Any other reflections from the panel? Top tips for the IBIC team?
I've had this conversation with Aileen a few times.
But you need to tell the rest of us.
Yeah, and in fact, we actually got approached by an academic from University of Manchester last week who was thinking of developing a bid in partnership with some other universities as well. And it's a nice thing to hear, because normally we get a request for a letter of support a week before deadline. And the general, it'd be nice if you could have the mayor sign this. which is always amusing with a week's notice. But it is that piece to talk early and often to your combined authority. I mean, IBIC aligns quite nicely with a lot of the funding we've put into NERIC, what I mentioned earlier around robotics, into a programme called AMIC, which is MMU looking at 3D printing and industrial digitalisation. There's a lot of crossover with some of the stuff that TIC are doing, Turing Innovation Catalyst. There's loads of other funding we have going on. Engage and join up with it. Don't try to operate in glorious isolation, because ultimately there will be businesses who can cross over, who need the help as well, because they've gone through the wrong front door. But it's work with us to reduce those number of steps to get them to the support they need, but also to make sure that you're improving the impact of your funding by aligning it with other activity as well.
Brilliant. Thank you, Matt. And Mark, any final reflections to your side? Top tips from the 11 years of operation?
I think what we've learned is certainly collaboration, not competition. You know, we multiply what we do with both the resources we've got and the reach that we've got by working in partnership with wide-ranging. I mean, even this year already, we've done, I think we heard about the textiles workshop with the UK fashion industry. We've done the establishment of the ocean seafood cluster for Scotland, looking at seafood waste and valorisation and so on. We've done forestry, seaweed, cosmetics. You know, the reach is facilitated by those strong partnerships that you develop with complementary organisations and sectors. The other little extra bit that just struck me, because you've got a very heavy academic strong audience today, is maybe the way we carve it up is sector focus, and so a lot of our business engagement team have particular sectors that they lead on, and they're the face of that, and also they've got particular universities that they portfolio manage, and they're again the face of that. And we find that to be very effective. If you get hung up on just looking at technology platforms, then you're very broad, and I think the challenge is getting traction with that, because everyone's pulling in different directions. So I think it would be just think about what you're trying to deliver, a bit like Jude, you know, work back from what does success look like, really, but partnership is absolutely critical. We couldn't have achieved anything like we've done if we just worked in isolation, and I think we know that as researchers as well, but it's true across businesses as well.
I suppose it's that interesting dichotomy. Oh, sorry, there's a question there. So,
just going to raise a point. Based on what Richard Jones says, that in Cambridge they were getting about 5 to 6 times the company investment per pound they put from the government, and Andrew Bourne from EPSRC said they were targeting 3 to 1. Now, these are ratios that probably I don't see happening that often in the north of England from sort of industrial companies, close to 1 to 1 possibly, I think, in the experience I find. Is there a way when companies want to access scale-up capabilities that there can be some mechanism around future, you know, if it goes on to work, the money comes back from there, rather than just asking companies for money up front that they don't have, but at the same time funding what has to be quite an expensive process that we can better make work? Because obviously Cambridge dealing in kind of quite high value added technologies quite a lot of time, where you can get the company to put the money in because they can see it coming back soon. Some industrial processes take a lot longer to really generate that value. So how do we make the sums add up? Well, not giving companies stuff for free, but owning part of the profit.
okay, so it's almost developing those new business models, supporting the access, but also de-risking private investment for longer term. Is that correct? Any initial reflections? Oh, Jude, take us away.
Yeah, sorry. I think a lot of the CROs and CMOs are looking at that business model in terms of a risk profile. For me, it is all about risk, understanding what the appetite is. A lot of people at the moment don't have funding to invest in people, regardless of which business model you use. So I think there would need to be a very serious sort of business case that supported that intervention. I think, again, it would be interesting to understand the metrics of the numbers that were quoted this morning, because in Cambridge, you're right, there's no sort of large, well, typically not any large manufacturing there. So again, it would be interesting to know if you're comparing like for like. But again, we'd take people from Cambridge who want to scale up in the northeast. Presumably you'd take them in Scotland, where agnostic on that front, as long as we could secure them to scale and be, grow and add to the GVA. I think we'd be fine with that.
And I think something that you said earlier about Mark, about really working with those different sectors and applications. Route way to market for pharma is very different to, say, agri-tech or fashion. The regulation's very different and the skills required. So I think also being open and honest that they are going to be different timelines. Matthew, I saw you're all gone up now.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Let's go, Jude, to come back on that one.
Yeah, it was
then
just
Mark and Matthew.
the point that I was making earlier about that ecosystem change. I think the landscape for investment return is not particularly well known in this sector. Pharma, you know how long it takes to develop a drug, you know what your multiple returns are going to be. It's not the same. And I think there needs to be an education piece to the investment community as well around actually what the risk involved in scaling biotech processes is, how long it's going to take, what the quantums of numbers are compared to the basic R&D that it takes to scale. And I think that there is an education piece that we need to educate investors, innovators and the public sector to just see that shift change that helps that translation piece.
An investor education workshop then, Aileen, potentially at Marble Brewery. Could be the way forward. Mark and then Matthew.
I was just going to say, I think, in terms of royalty discussions and so on, that all happens at university level when you're spending out and, cuts and so on. I think your point about, how do you access the scale up without having all of the funding available that you would have to pay up front and so on. I think in medicines manufacturing, I think there is a track record in that, and that some of the large CMOs, when you get to later phases of clinical, they will take shared risks. So the Lonzas and the Boehringer Ingelheims and large market share players would take some shared risk, perhaps. With the products that many of you and us are all working on, they're really not strong in the market at the minute. And actually at the minute, if we're honest about it, the Trump wave has really given us some major problems across the world in many ways. However, in the investment community, appetite for US investors to invest in biotech at the minute, it's not seen as a favourite thing, and so they're backing away from that at the moment. In Europe, it's still quite strong, but it's not great. It's not a great investment environment at the minute. And what we see is very easy to get early stage rounds and so on to get going, but once you get to manufacturing, some of the companies have obviously invested in manufacturing assets themselves and done a major fundraise. We've seen only 6 or 7 of our companies that we work with who have done more than 20 million. And we know that that doesn't go very far when it comes to facilities as well. So, but it would pay for, obviously, development and manufacturing as an outsourced solution. So challenging times, but, again, I think it'll come around again. But there isn't a shared risk model in these sorts of products at the minute that I'm aware of.
And finally, Matthew.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to do a really good job of communication around making sure that figure, that ratio that's been put up by the government doesn't scare people off. Because the reality of that, in looking at the experience of the Innovation Accelerator that we've been running for 2 and a bit years now, we have hit better than 1-to-1 already, largely off the back of a really fantastic firm in Glasgow bringing in a lot of VC. But that is 2-to-1 over the next 5 years is the target there. So we're not expecting people to come through the door with a signed letter of commitment and a cheque in the hand for 2/3 of the money. And there is an expectation, there is a view there that it's done over the portfolio. So there's a potential there for some of the AI plays that are being made at the minute to kind of generate a lot of that more quickly and some of that longer burn to go on. But I think going back to that, the first question looping around what are the big barriers, patient capital is a massive issue in this country. Patient capital with a view that it will invest in something other than property is an even bigger issue. So it is something that everyone's aware of as an issue, but let's not have it scaring people who've got good ideas off coming through the front door.
Thank you very much. Do we have any other questions? We have time for one more, in which case, no. Oh, perfect. Thank you. Last question. Oh, they're coming.
Hello. I don't know how relevant my question/thought is, and I'll try and articulate it as best as I can. But my My thought is that there might be like a skills gap coming out from like universities. So I was just like wondering, and this is like kind of like a question for me. I was just wondering like how much conversation actually happens between like the people who like set the curriculum, for example, at universities, and like the biotech industry in terms of like what skills they want from like fresh graduates, etc. Yeah, so this is like a genuine question, not like.
No, I think it's a great question, and I'm sure that there'll be links to be made with Aileen and team to actually respond to that from the universities and vice versa. But can we go with Matthew first?
Yeah, the skill system with 46 seconds left. There's a lot of work being done at combined authority level around potential upcoming skills gaps in all the future industries. I mean, there was a local skills improvement fund work that kind of looked into this. Those areas where we have got devolved funding, we're trying to have those conversations as much as we possibly can and look at different models and different methods of how we start to take maybe graduates have come through MD, PhD level, but haven't really done the sort of in-depth lab skills they need, or the health economic stuff, and how we look at kind of upskilling those people while also looking at potentially technical routes to get to some of those as well, which are more accessible for those of our young people who don't want to go down the university route.
And Mark, in the last few seconds we have.
Yeah, I was just going to say we do quite a lot across skills. The one area that we don't really influence is at undergraduate level within universities. We work across HND level, thinking about alternative routes, and then we look at master's level with industrial placement that we run, and our PhD programme all the way through, which at its peak had about 120 IBioIC PhDs in it. The one thing I did want to say was one of the things that we do offer we've got a scale-up facility as well, but CPD, hands-on training, and that's the one thing which is missing. You can go around all of the universities in the UK now, and you could probably count on one hand, certainly not two hands, the number who have got physical assets that can allow students to run fermentations and strip down fermenters and set them up again. And that's what's missing. Somebody asked the question about skills gap, bioprocessing. Absolutely critical. We've trained nearly 300 people through our facility on CPD courses, and yet when we go out to recruit, our last recruits came from India, Argentina, Italy, and they're being hoovered up, but they're also being hoovered up by wider sectors, the food industry, brewing and distilling, because bioprocessing cuts across it. But we should be selfish and make sure we have enough of those skills for IB translation.
Absolutely. Well, can I say a huge round of applause to my panel, please? I do hope that's given you some food for thought and networking, but if that's not enough, I'm just going to invite Aileen to some closing remarks before we go into that session. So, thank you.
So thank you very much to the panel for an interesting discussion, which hopefully will catalyse some in-depth discussion over networking shortly. So you'll be pleased to know I'm not going to say too much. I'm just going to go through a couple of sort of logistics and operational things for this evening. So tonight, the dinner, for those that are staying, is going to be back in this room at 7:15. But before that, we have networking drinks, which is just on the floor below, the 12th floor, which starts at 6 o'clock, sponsored by IBioIC. So please do come along to that, 6 o'clock downstairs. Because the dinner is in this room, we are being asked, and I asked you very kindly, to vacate this room from now until the drinks start at 6 o'clock. Please go check into the hotels if you're staying over. Take a walk. It is dry. It's starting to warm up outside. And downstairs, the cafe is there, and there's networking spaces downstairs as well. So please take the hour, take a breather, think of all those things that you want to chat to everybody tonight. At the dinner, at the networking session tonight, there is the poster session. So those that have posters, they are on the digital boards downstairs. If you don't see your poster, do a swipe to the left, and you will find your poster. They are all there. We've gone digital with the poster sessions. For those of you that don't have a poster, please interact with them. Have a look through the posters. There's a QR code on there. Vote for your favourite, because there are cash prizes, which we will announce at the winners at close of play tomorrow. So See everybody at the networking drinks, floor 12, 6 o'clock, and just thank everybody, all the speakers and everybody for participating in today's jam-packed session, which I hope you've all found useful, insightful, and